Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Coup Save America. I'm your host, Sean Sainhart, and today I would like to speak for a moment about last week's Democratic National Convention, where tens of thousands descended on Chicago's United Center to witness the adoption of the 2024 Democratic Party platform. Now, this event was supposed to be the blueprint for the party's future, but as with many things in the political realm, we need to ask, who is really pulling the strings behind this so-called democracy? Take Bully Pulpit International, or BPI, as a prime example. During the convention, they threw a big bash called the Party Line for DNC delegates. Now, BPI isn't just some small communications firm. They are one of the top paid consultants in the Democratic Party ecosystem. Let's talk numbers here. Over the past 2 decades, they brought in a staggering $400 million in payments from various Democratic Party groups and campaigns. This is according to the Federal Election Commission records. That's enough money to make even the wealthiest of corporations blush. And who are their clients? Well, on one side of the coin, they're helping the Biden-Harris re-election campaign by producing slick media buys and digital ads. But flip that coin over, and BPI is also doing PR damage control for some of the largest corporations on the planet. These include McDonald's, Uber, Walmart. Let's not forget that these same corporations are fighting against the very labor protections that are supposedly central to the Democrats' draft platform. BPI's ties to corporate America don't stop there. This company was founded in 2009 by Obama campaign staffer Andrew Bleeker and digital media strategist Ben Clark. And it has since become a revolving door between Democratic political staffers and the corporate world. For example, BPI senior advisor Robert Gibbs, remember him? He was Obama's White House press secretary. He went on to work as the executive vice president of McDonald's and is now leading PR for Warner Brothers Discovery. Here's the kicker. After receiving over $100 million from the Obama and Clinton campaigns, BPI is now the third largest FEC filing client of the Democratic National Committee, having pocketed $64 million. And it's not just the DNC. BPI also worked for Biden's presidential campaign back in 2020, bringing in more than $41.5 million. So far in 2024, they've already raked in over $10 million from the campaign that's now fronted by Vice President Kamala Harris. So, what's the problem? Well, the same corporations, McDonald's, Walmart, and others who pay BPI to construct their messaging are actively lobbying against the very labor protections that the Democrats are promoting in their platform. The Democrats talk big about passing the PRO Act, raising the minimum wage to $15, and protecting workers' rights. But the reality is that BPI's clients are working day and night to prevent these measures from becoming law. According to Open Secrets, McDonald's spent $2.5 million on lobbying in 2023 alone, with a focus on blocking the PRO Act and fighting against regulations that would provide better wages and protections for workers. McDonald's, Walmart, and other corporate giants have a long history of anti-union campaigns. Let's take Walmart as a prime example. Walmart, which spent over $7 million on federal lobbying last year, has faced allegations of wage theft and worker exploitation going on for decades. The Center for Popular Democracy and Human Rights Watch have documented Walmart's efforts to crush unionization, and the company continues to lobby against labor reforms that would protect low-wage workers. BPI and its corporate clients are not simply fighting in the background. They are shaping the political landscape as we speak. As they brag on in large, bold letters on their website, quote, "We shape the most important conversations," end quote. BPI's proprietary tools, such as the Orbit platform, allow it to target key decision makers in government and business, pushing policies that protect corporate interests while undermining worker protections. Their clients, like Uber and Instacart, are pushing hard to classify their workers as independent contractors, denying them benefits like overtime pay and, of course, healthcare. And this isn't just about worker exploitation. It's about something much more sinister: control. Take the 2017 Republican Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which showered the wealthiest Americans with huge tax breaks. Many of these provisions are set to expire soon, and Republicans are planning to extend them. In response, BPI announced a new tax policy practice headed by former Commerce Department aides, aiming to influence the debate and protect corporate tax breaks at all costs. Meanwhile, average Americans are left in the lurch as income inequality continues to widen to unprecedented levels. Now let's talk about the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, which Democrats tout as their flagship labor reform. House Democrats have passed this bill twice in recent years, only to see it die in the Senate due to the Republican filibusters. The bill would expand workers' rights to organize and make it harder for employers to classify workers as independent contractors for the purpose of denying them benefits. But despite the Democratic Party's rhetoric, corporate interests, including BPI clients, have fought tooth and nail to kill this legislation. BPI isn't just some hired gun for the Democrats. It's a company deeply embedded in corporate America, and it's playing both sides of the fence. On the one hand, they're helping the Democratic Party craft its messaging around progressive labor policies, while on the other, they're doing PR work for the very same corporations that are actively fighting against these policies. It's a glaring conflict of interest, one that exposes the hypocrisy at the heart of the Democratic Party's relationship with corporate power. Therefore, folks, we are being sold a lie. The Democratic Party claims to stand for the working class, for labor rights, and for economic justice. But behind the scenes, the very firms that the party relies on are undermining these goals at every turn. This is a system we're up against, a system where corporate money speaks louder than the will of the people, and where policy is shaped not by voters, but by the highest bidders. So, as we often ask on this show, where do we go from here? It's time to recognize that the solution doesn't lie in the hands of politicians beholden to corporate interest. Real change will come from direct action, mass mobilization, and a refusal to accept the status quo. The fight for economic justice isn't going to be won in the halls of Congress. It's going to be won in the streets by people like you and me. Stay tuned, folks, because Coup Save America is just getting started. On today's episode, we are thrilled to welcome Karen Knight, an internationally recognized author, presenter, and thought leader with nearly 30 years of experience in volunteer engagement. Karen has spent her career challenging traditional thinking around volunteerism, shining the spotlight on the overlooked issues, and offering creative solutions to long-standing challenges in the social impact space. Karen's journey spans a wide range of industries across the private, public, and social impact sectors, where she has taken on leadership roles and worked tirelessly to make a difference. As both a volunteer and a leader of volunteers, Karen's passion for driving change is rooted in her deep hands-on experience and extensive research. Whether it's mentoring organizations, training volunteer leaders, or serving on boards, Karen's dedication to improving the infrastructure and effectiveness of volunteerism is undeniable. Today, we'll be diving into her innovative ideas and exploring how we can revolutionize volunteerism to better support the volunteers themselves and the causes they believe in. Please join me in welcoming Karen Knight to the show right after the break. We'll be right back. And welcome to the show, Karen Knight. Karen, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to talk to you. I've been very active in volunteerism since I was a teenager.
Okay.
And I'm very intrigued by some of your ideas. And one of the first questions that I have is, why do you believe that our current society couldn't exist without volunteerism?
Oh, there's a myriad of reasons. The main one is the vast majority of the services that we offer to the underprivileged or the people who are struggling in so many different ways, as well as the arts, environmental issues, all of this stuff are run by nonprofits. And the vast majority of the workforce in nonprofits are volunteers. If government or industry had to take on the role that these volunteers fill, everything would collapse. They just couldn't do it. So that's the key reason is they're the ones who drive the change and the value of our societies.
Yeah, and I'll just add too to the audience in case they don't know that the radio station that we're broadcasting on right now is a nonprofit run by volunteers.
There you go.
And I think it's so important for people to understand, especially in today's polarized climate, that the change that we're seeing isn't really coming from the political sphere. It's coming from people, nonprofit organizations, social interest groups, people that depend on volunteerism, as you just mentioned. And I wonder, what are some of the challenges that for instance, a lot of volunteers are facing extreme stress in their personal lives, economically. How is that impacting volunteerism?
In a few different ways. Number one, especially with the cost of living right now, and this is internationally, the cost of living is skyrocketed. So people who would normally spend their free time helping out with a cause that they believe in are now getting a second job, or they're doing something else to fill that time so that they can bring more money in. On top of that, there's a number of organizations, and it's changing. That's changing now, but there are still a number of organizations where they ask volunteers to pay out of pocket for certain things. So, for example, if they ask them to do driving for, say, Meals on Wheels, I know of one Meals on Wheels program that asks the drivers to donate their gas money.
Right.
Well, that's a barrier to a lot of people. People can't afford to do that anymore. So what was expected and understood before is changing now. So we just can't ask people to do that.
Yeah, and I as someone who has co-founded a nonprofit organization and is fully aware of the financial constraints and challenges, I understand both sides of that issue. Nonprofit organizations are desperate for donations, especially in these economic times. Donations are down, and it's very hard to run a nonprofit. And one of the criticisms that I hear people often say is, well, look at the money that nonprofits spend on administrative costs, not understanding that, like a traditional business, nonprofits have expenses that they have to pay, and those administrative costs are essential to keeping those organizations afloat. And a lot of people, when you can make a decision between, do you want this donation to go towards administrative cost or to the direct action, a lot of people choose direct action, not realizing that negatively impacts the organization's mission.
Exactly. Yeah, so many, you hear that over and over and over, and I always cringe because you can say, well, you shouldn't be paying the staff so much. Well, if you don't pay the staff a decent wage, you're not going to have any staff, or you're going to have people who just bumble around and make mistakes, and it actually impacts what you're trying to do. You're actually pulling away from the people the money's supposed to go to because you're not giving money to administration. It needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gets so frustrated when I hear that as well. And again, especially coming from being, someone who was co-founded a nonprofit organization and understanding, I mean, the cost of just starting a nonprofit are extraordinary. The cost of keeping volunteers engaged is extraordinary. I mean, you have to, it's in a lot of times you have to treat it like it's their employees. You want to provide benefits. Exactly.
You invest in them. They're the ones who are actually boots on the ground and making a difference out there. If you don't treat them well, now it doesn't take an extraordinary amount of money, but it does take a lot of thought and judicial investment in training, in appreciation, all of that sort of thing. If you invest prudently, but understanding it's an investment, you'll get far more, and your organization will have a greater impact in your community. But if you just assume that volunteers are free, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have a lot of trouble.
Yeah, especially with volunteer retention. I mean, you want to provide a environment that is welcoming and encouraging, and that gives something back to volunteers.
Yeah. There's a change happening around the idea of retention. If you think back, say 20, 30 years, everybody came out of school and they went and got a job, and then they stayed in that job. My parents are prime examples. They graduated and they were with the same company for the rest of their lives. Nobody does that anymore. And the same change is happening in volunteerism. People don't want to commit for 20 years like their grandparents did. They want to experiment. They want to have the flexibility to try this one day and try something else a different day, right? And it's not just young volunteers either. I know a guy, we'll call him George. I don't have his permission to use his story on the air, but he used to work for one organization and did for years, and he finally left it because he had to do the same thing week in, week out, and he just got bored. And so now he works for about 3 different organizations. So one day, hey, he's got lots of time, he's feeling good, so he goes out and helps clean up a salmon stream, for example.
Oh, okay.
But the next day, well, his hip's bothering him and his grandkids are coming over. So he goes to another organization and helps out in the office for 2 hours, right? That kind of flexibility and the ability to change and try new things is huge for volunteers these days. They don't want to do the same thing over and over and over again.
What kind of diversity is there in volunteerism as far as opportunities go?
As far as opportunities, what kinds of opportunities? There is something for everyone, literally everyone. Whatever your passion is, there is an organization out there looking for volunteers to help with that, right? Whether if you're passionate about fishing, there are fish and game organizations who are trying to rehabilitate salmon streams or bring back dying species and things like that, who would love your experience, right? Or if you're into children, there's thousands who are into who are helping children in many different ways, big brothers and big sisters. Like I said, there's thousands of them. You want to work with seniors, there's again thousands. You want to do lots of driving, we can do that. Meals on Wheels, there's you name it, you can find a volunteer place for it. There's always somebody looking for it. So just choose one that you're passionate about, because then it adds so much more to your experience.
And to your life too. I mean, it's a proven fact that helping others actually improves your mental health, which impacts your physical health. So there's so many advantages to volunteering.
Mm-hmm.
What we kind of discussed earlier, the problem with especially these economic times is that people now don't have the time to donate. What have you seen as far as the impact of that goes, as far as nonprofits?
Most nonprofits are struggling right now to find volunteers. That's a great deal of what I do, is I go in and try and figure out ways that they can bring volunteers in. Just about every client I go in with, or people I talk to say, well, we have a recruitment issue. We can't get people in. But surprisingly enough, it's very seldom a recruitment issue. It's more something in the background. So for example, I was speaking with one group that said, yeah, we can't get volunteers. I mean, we have problems with recruitment. But they would get something like 15 applications a month. And the applications would go through, and then the people would never show up. So I said, okay, this isn't a recruitment issue. There's something else in the background that's stopping things. There's barriers to people. People are interested in helping. Oh, but I can't actually, because I have to jump through all these hoops first. Right. So I go in and say, okay, it's these hoops that are the problem. What can we do to lower them, to eliminate them, to get them going? So a lot of times, if you can just sit back and look at your organization from the outside, you can find ways to bring people in. And a lot of it is the flexibility. Don't require long-term commitments, because people won't be able to do it, especially in times when the economics are so challenging. They may only be able to donate about 2 hours a month, if that's all they can do. Be welcoming to that. Don't insist that they have to fill a shift every week.
Right. What are some of the biggest hoops that you found that or misconceptions that nonprofits have regarding their volunteer program that impedes their effectiveness?
Oh, there's a few of them. One, like I was just saying, the one is wanting this commitment. We want somebody to come in and do all of this stuff over and over and over and over again. Another one is screening. A lot of organizations screen every volunteer that comes through their door. So police checks, background checks, all of that sort of thing. Even though the volunteer won't be in a position where they can cause harm. So for example, you may have an organization that works with children. So every volunteer has to be screened because they're working with children. So they screen all the volunteers, even the remote volunteer who works on their website, right? It just doesn't make sense. The volunteer is not even in the building. They're nowhere near the children. But because there is a policy that all volunteers need to be screened for the protection of the children, people can get screened out if they have a background that may make getting a police check uncomfortable or inappropriate. So be really careful about your screening. Screen those you have to, absolutely, no question about it. But make sure you're not screening everybody just because that's a policy, right? If they're not in a position where they can cause harm, there's no point in screening them. It's expensive, it's challenging, and it's a barrier to a lot of people.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people too that have criminal records that want to volunteer, that are upstanding citizens, that again, and they're discriminated against in the workforce, and they're also discriminated against in the volunteer sector.
And volunteering is a huge benefit to people who have had a criminal background, because it gives them a chance to prove themselves.
Right.
Yes, I as a business owner, I may be leery about hiring somebody who has a criminal record. But if I look back and see that they've worked for 3 years at this particular charity and they've done all this good things, well, that turns me in the other direction. Well, maybe this guy has turned things around. Right. So we need to give those people an opportunity to make a difference in the world and in their own lives.
What are some of the other hoops that you've encountered other than the screening?
Certain training. I worked with an organization who required, before you even filled your first shift, 6 months worth of training. So
Wow.
now, yeah, now, uh, granted, it was a hospice, so they were working with people at the end of their lives. There's a lot you need to learn, but there are ways of easing people in. So make sure they have 2 weeks worth of training, and then use them at the front desk, or use them to help with gardening, right? And then as they slowly go through the training, then you can give them more and more opportunities. So, but you don't have to require the whole 6 months up front, because I can tell you most people quit before they're done. They won't. You'll train them halfway, and then they'll walk. So
Right. They want to get on that hands-on experience.
Exactly. They want to see that they're making a difference.
Yeah. What how do you define true value of volunteerism in today's world, especially?
True value for the volunteer, or for the organization, or
Well,
for the
for
community?
the community, I would say.
Okay. If a volunteer can make a difference by, you mentioned early on in the talk about polarization. Volunteerism is probably one of, I wrote an article about this, about is one of the best ways to end polarization. Because if you're working as a volunteer and helping other people who are experiencing different challenges, it opens your mind, right? You can't just go in there and be the same person you were before you started. And once you can see the world from one different point of view, you know that there are other points of view. And now you're a little more willing to sit down and talk to somebody,
right,
that maybe you wouldn't have before, right? And say, okay, I couldn't have believed this made sense before, but now I'm starting to understand it. So maybe this other thing that I've always been so against, maybe there is some good in it. I may not change my mind about whether I'm for or against it, but at least I'm willing to sit down and learn a bit more about it. And I swear up and down, you cannot volunteer on a regular basis without seeing that change. So if you want to eliminate polarization, everybody should volunteer. you just learn so much more about different people in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the problem with polarization is that people are just not talking to each other anymore.
Exactly.
You're either on one team or the other, and that's it. There's no crossover. There's no you mentioned having an open mind. I noticed in today's world, we don't seem to debate issues anymore. We debate feelings. We
argue. We don't
yes.
debate.
Yeah. And nothing is getting solved. Things are just getting worse. Which actually brings me an interesting question here. So as far as polarization goes, have you found that certain types, because people are going to volunteer to what they're interested in.
Right.
Have you found that a lot of polarization exists in terms of, for instance, someone who might volunteer for one cause is more geared to having certain political leanings? Or is that just completely, am I off base completely on that?
That's a hard one for me to answer for a couple reasons. The first reason is I'm Canadian, so our political structure is significantly different than yours. So I don't see that quite so much. I find, and this is just, there's no research behind this, it's just kind of what I've seen. If you are more likely, you're more likely to be liberal leaning if you volunteer at a homeless shelter or a food bank, and more conservative leaning if you are volunteering at for the symphony orchestra, for example. Now, these are massive generalizations, and it's not one way or the other in any sort of form. But I think if you were to say there's a leaning one way or another, I think that's the way it would be. If you're into the arts, or if you're volunteering for a political campaign, that'll tell you very clearly which one. But generally, it's very, very slight. But that, I think, would be where I would put it. But like I said, that's massive generalization.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you. While we were talking, I was thinking, okay, an example would be like a homeless shelter or a food bank, where someone's probably more likely to be more liberal. On the other hand, there's conservatives that volunteer for similar organizations through their church,
yes,
as well, that accomplishes the same thing. So, yeah, there's definitely going to be some crossover. I was just curious if you saw that. For instance, an organization that I've been involved with, I'm big into orcas.
Okay.
And we have in Washington State, our orcas are endangered.
Right.
And
here in BC too.
Yeah. Well, probably they're the same pods, actually.
Same pods, yeah.
And so there's all sorts of organizations that are quite different. You mentioned restoring salmon streams.
Right.
That's not directly, well, it is directly related to saving the orcas, but it's more geared towards if you're into fishing, if you're into, protecting wildlife in a certain respect, you might volunteer for this organization, not even realizing the crossover effect that it has in so many different areas of society.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how we get that message across to people that you're not just helping. I mean, again, if you're working on a homeless shelter, you're not just, helping people who are homeless. You're helping the entire community in ways that are not clear.
Not obvious. Yeah.
Not obvious. Right. How can we do a better job of emphasizing that point?
I think part of it is the organizations themselves need to become aware of it. And once they are aware of it, then storytelling. Stories are the best way to get information across. I mean, we're hardwired to learn from stories. If we can show the story of, we took this person off the street, gave them a house, got them off their addiction issues, dealt with this, then now they've gone on and now they're out there rescuing orcas, right? If we can tell that story and show the interconnectedness of the entire community, because no one person in a community can affect only one other, right? Every time you connect or make a difference to one, you make a difference to everybody.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, in your experience, what do you think motivates people to volunteer in the first place?
That's a really hard question to answer. Mostly, and this will offend people, and I'm sorry. Mostly people do it to get something out of it. People will say, they will believe that they are doing it to give back, to help the community, altruistic things.
Right.
90% of the time, if you do you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yes.
Okay. So I won't explain that. I encourage anybody who doesn't know to look it up. It's quite interesting. We tend to look, the first level, of course, is just survival. Do we have enough food to eat? Can we breathe? All that sort of stuff. Right. But the more you go up, the higher it gets to true altruism. So the peak is I'm good, I'm strong, now it's time to give back. most people don't reach that. So when they volunteer, it's in an effort to reach that. So by volunteering, they're fulfilling one of the other needs in that hierarchy, a need for respect by the community, a need for belonging, a need for strong relationships, a need for some of it's even more basic. Is I need to gain skills so that I can go out and get a better job. I need to network so that I can meet people so that I can get ahead in life. Even people who really do have a belief that they're giving back because I went through breast cancer, for example, so now I'm helping with the Cancer Society because of what they did for me. It's also because it satisfies an inner need, right? That's why we do it, is because we get something out of it. And there is nothing wrong with that.
Right.
We try and hide it, even from ourselves, that we're doing something for our own benefit. But there is nothing wrong with doing things for your own benefit, because it comes back to that web I was talking about. Because if you help yourself, you're helping everybody else in the community as well. So it all ties together.
Yeah. And even the fact that it feels good to give back can be deemed selfish, but that impacts other people as well. It impacts your family, it impacts your friends, your coworkers.
Exactly. Because if you feel good about yourself, then you're friendlier to other people, you're more productive at work, you're all of this stuff. So yeah, sorry, I can go on. I get really passionate about volunteering.
Well, are you familiar with hunter-gatherer societies?
Yeah.
That to me is where I would go with the root of volunteerism. We are hardwired to help each other, and we, in this so-called world of civilization that which is not very civil, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
We've become more competitive with each other.
Yeah.
We've become
And
more
isolated.
And more isolated, exactly. And so volunteering is a way to sort of return to our roots in a respect. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the challenges coming out of COVID is the sense of isolation that so many people have had. And it's impacting. I have a neighbor who has a young daughter. I guess she's about 7 or 8 now. Her first 3 years in school, she wasn't in school. She was at home. And now trying to get out and learn to be friends with people is heartbreaking to watch her. So things like volunteering and working with other people is a way to get past that. And whether you're 7 years old and never been to a real school before, or you're a teenager who missed all the socialization and being a teenager, or you're a adult who's been stuck at home and not being able to go out, we need people. And volunteering is a fantastic way of building that. Even if you're working from home. I mean, I'm a consultant. I work from home. I make a point of going out and volunteering because it gives me that social connection that we all need so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love your passion, by the way.
Thank you.
I mean, it's great to do what you love.
Yes, absolutely.
What do you think organizations themselves can do to increase volunteerism?
Make it easier, like reduce the barriers, add more flexibility, and to some extent, and this is starting more and more over the last probably 4 or 5 years, is the idea of actually advocating for volunteerism. Here in Canada, we're putting together a movement, if you would, to get a seat in Parliament, to have a member of Parliament actually in charge of volunteering, so that it has that kind of what's the word I'm looking for, visibility, that this is an important part of having a civilized society, is volunteerism, and we need to make that a priority. So that's one thing, and I know it's happening in the States as well, that more and more advocacy is happening about volunteerism at a governmental level.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that organizations need to also shift their mindset a bit from viewing volunteers as just free labor to being vital contributors of their community and their nation and the world at large.
Right. Absolutely. If you think of volunteers just as free labor, you're getting what you pay for. Right? You'll attract people who aren't going to think hard. They're just going to come in, they're going to do their piece, and they're going to walk away. Few people want to do that anymore. They want to use the skills that they have. And volunteers a pay scale. It's not a skill level, right? You can have someone stuffing envelopes in your office who may be a lawyer or a retired doctor or a rocket scientist. Use those skills. How can you take that person and, instead of having them stuff envelopes, have the CEO of a local company all of a sudden give you advice on marketing and helping spread the word about the cause that you believe in. But you have to think of them as skilled people that you can use, rather than, or not use, but that you can engage and get involved, rather than just thinking they're free, so we'll give them some menial task to do. Right? You're hurting your organization, you're hurting your cause, and you're not going to keep volunteers because they'll get bored, they'll go somewhere where they're valued.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, those are great points. I'm thinking too, again, I'm thinking of what you're saying and how we can apply that to the radio station in our volunteer program as well. And again, it's really difficult to
tell me about your volunteers then. What do your volunteers do at the station?
Well, everything. The entire station is volunteer run. Okay. Actually, our entire nonprofit is volunteer run. Right. We don't have any paid staff. Right. And so we've got volunteers that create courses, online courses. One of our ideas actually was to create an online education portal specifically designed to help train volunteers for other organizations.
Oh, nice.
Online. So, like learning skills that might be beneficial to an organization, in particular, like learning about activism, learning about how to act and behave in protests or social gatherings, so that you're not hurting the organization's image.
Right.
So we're looking for volunteers to help create those courses, and it's been very, very hard to do that. I'm afraid to say that we have recruitment issues because
what are you looking for from someone to volunteer for something like that? What skills are you asking for?
Well, basically, like for the courses, we're asking obviously that the person be informed about the skills that they're teaching, about the the processes and so forth. But I mean, we're wide open in that range because there's so many courses that can be created.
Oh yeah. think it's a brilliant idea.
Our goal is so that other organizations can use it as training. And then, of course, we also issue certificates. So once you complete a course, you have the certificate that can be verified online.
Right.
The other nonprofits can say, oh, okay, you've got that skill. You've had that, you've had that training.
Okay. My suggestion would be to go to a local teaching school and say, we're looking for this. Does anybody want to do one of these courses as a project?
Oh, okay. That's a great idea. Wow.
See, this is what I do. See, yeah, I could dive right into that, but that's not what this podcast is about.
Well, it is now. So see, these are great ideas. How do nonprofits go about hiring consultants like you? Because I imagine that there's probably a shortage of consultants.
Yeah, there's not many of us, not in the volunteer space. As far as I know, there are probably about 24 in North America.
Wow.
And probably 5 that I could strongly recommend. And then worldwide, there may be about 50 of us. So yeah, there's not a lot in this particular segment. But Google, just Google volunteer consulting. And I'll probably come up because I am one of the better known ones in the world. I've been doing it for a while, but
and I want to take this chance too to just promote your website, KarenKnight.ca.
CA because I'm Canadian.
So Karen Knight, CA, and you've also written a lot of articles on the subject as well. Where can people find the articles?
On my website. I've got a blog there, and yeah, I've written a lot. I just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I passed my 150th article because I write a new blog every week. So yeah, I passed 150 of them. So if you come up with topics for me, I'd love to hear it because I'm starting to run dry.
There's nothing worse than running dry on ideas.
No,
that's for sure.
But fortunately, my clients usually give me good things to talk about. So,
what advice do you have for organizations that are struggling to keep their volunteers actually engaged?
It all comes down to appreciation. Well, 2 things. You need to be able to draw a direct line between the task that you're asking them to do and the advancement of the mission. Because they start volunteering for you in particular because they believe in your mission. They believe in what you're doing in the world. If you ask them to do something and they can't see how that impacts the mission, they're going to get frustrated and they're going to leave. So even if you've just got them stuffing envelopes, explain that we're stuffing these envelopes to get donations so that we can do X.
Right.
Make sure that line is drawn. What's that old story about the president going to NASA and talking to the janitor and saying, what do you do here? And he said, I'm helping put a man on the moon. Right? You have to think that way, no matter what the task is. How can you draw a line between what you're asking them to do and the mission? And if you can't draw that line, why are they doing it? It's just busy work. Right? So that's part of it. And the other one is pure appreciation. Show them that you see their value. I tell my clients this, it doesn't work for really big organizations, but thank every volunteer, every shift, right? And if at all possible, and this takes work, it takes watching your volunteers, is instead of just saying, hey, thanks, great job, say, hey, thank you for organizing the storeroom. It's so much easier to find things now. It'll save us all a ton of time. So you see the kind of difference of impact that a specific thank you has, right? So those are the main things to keep people engaged. Is show them they're valued and show them they're making a difference.
Yeah, and that has to be hard too, because you have to have the staff to be watching the volunteers, to be noticing these things.
Mm-hmm. Or you can have a hierarchy of volunteers. A lot of organizations that I work with have limited staff, or like the radio station, no staff at all.
No, yeah.
But you can have a hierarchy of volunteers. You can have senior volunteers leading other volunteers. I did that for years. I was. Do you know the organization Toastmasters?
I
Toastmasters
don't.
International. It's a public speaking and leadership training organization. So it. I won't go into the whole detail, but if you want to get over a fear of public speaking, Toastmasters is the best way to do it.
Really?
But it is volunteer run. Our international vice president is a volunteer. We have a head office with a certain number of staff, but the majority of the decision making is all done by volunteers. So if you can have that kind of hierarchy where, okay, there's one staff member and then say 2 or 3 senior volunteers who are each in charge of a different program, and then volunteers under that, then you can spread that workload. So you don't have to have staff watching each volunteer all the time.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great idea as well. I like that.
Well, you probably work in a very similar thing because of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, my mind is just racing here, thinking about all this now. You just mentioned one, but can you think of other examples of organizations that effectively support their volunteers that do a really good job?
Specific organizations?
Well, yeah, like organizations that we might know about that are like really doing the right thing with their volunteer program.
Oh, the bigger ones tend to get a bit tied up in bureaucracy. The SPCA is one that's usually really good, although I know they have issues with certain of their programs. That's one that I've seen do really, really well for appreciation and drawing that line between what we're asking you to do and the animals. There's like I said, the bigger ones tend to get caught up in bureaucracy and stuff. The Vancouver Aquarium in Vancouver, BC is one that I know personally does an amazing job. So yeah, there are a lot out there. The smaller ones tend to be a lot better at it because
Really?
they're not tied up with bureaucracy. They're not as separated from the actual work as the big ones. So the people who are making decisions about volunteers are just 1 or 2 levels above the volunteer themselves. So they have a clearer understanding. And so they truly feel the appreciation, rather they feel it viscerally, like in their gut, rather than just a mental, oh yeah, we couldn't do it without them. Right. And now let's go on to something else, right? So the bigger organizations, there's so many levels between what the volunteer actually does and the people making the decision that kind of true understanding gets lost. That's why I've seen that the smaller ones tend to be better with the appreciation side of things.
That's interesting, because I would have thought that the larger organizations. Well, I mean, you mentioned like the Vancouver Aquarium, which is probably a larger organization than a lot of charities, budget wise at least.
And the number of volunteers it has.
Right. Too. What is it? A fully volunteer?
No, it does have staff. Yeah.
Okay. What are some of the things that you think that they do right? Is it just the appreciation, or are there other, like, are there perks that are offered that really increase incentives, or?
There are some perks. Generally, I tend to hold back a bit on perks. I get a lot of questions. Should we pay an honorarium, or should we give all our volunteers this? There are 4 types of appreciation that I talk about. One is just general thank yous. Just say thank you to your volunteer, every shift. The second one I kind of call tangible gratitude. And that's when somebody goes a bit above and beyond and you give them something, a token. It could be a $5 coffee card or something like that, a mug or a hat or whatever. Then there's public acknowledgement. So posting about a volunteer of the month, or some amazing volunteer did this and now it's their birthday, so we're going to talk about them. You have to be careful with that because not everybody wants their name and face splattered all over the internet, but there are ways of doing that. And the last one is appreciation events, is the big party at the end of the year or at the end of the season or whatever. The tangible gratitude one, I have seen done really well, and I've seen it done very, very poorly. When it's done poorly, it tends to be they pour a ton of money into it and not a lot of thought. So people are just given stuff all the time, and it doesn't mean anything anymore, right? It's just, oh yeah, they just give us all this stuff, and I end up throwing it away anyway, right? Find things. Don't do it all the time. Do it when somebody goes above and beyond, so that it's an incentive rather than just a treat. It's not the everybody gets a gold star type thing. It's something a little bit above and beyond. But so yeah, perks are good, but perks don't necessarily have to cost money. So a number of years ago, when I was working with Toastmasters, we had a conference, and we were bringing in a speaker from out of town. And one of my key volunteers was the speaker's, okay, I got this backwards now. The speaker was one of my key volunteers' hero. Thought the world of him, thought he was the most amazing thing. So when the speaker flew in, I sent Joe to pick him up from the airport. So he got an hour and a half or 2 hours of one-on-one time with his hero, instead of me going and picking up, which is what I would normally do. So little perks like that can mean an awful lot. Joe still talks about that. This was years ago, right? Little things like that. But you have to know your volunteers. You have to know what they value and give them that. That's one thing that the Vancouver Aquarium does well, is they know their volunteers. I know the leader of volunteers there, and she makes a point of having a relationship with every volunteer so that she can tell what sorts of things they would really appreciate.
Right. Yeah, so that's a good point that you just made about the perks, because I was thinking that perks would be more of an incentive, like tangible perks.
Right.
But no, I see what you're saying. Wow. I can see why people pay you to
I've been well, I haven't had the business for as long, but I've been involved in the not-for-profit sector for decades. So yeah, I've seen some amazing things, and I've seen some really, really awful things. I went to volunteer once at a gallery, an art gallery, and I walked in. I can't even remember why I chose to do that. But anyway, I went in, I applied, I got accepted. I did this online training course, and they said, okay, your first shift is such and such a time, show up here, look for this person, they'll tell you what to do. So I did all that. First shift, I show up, and the person looked at me blankly, had no idea I was coming, had nothing for me to do. So she gave me some busy work stuff, and I thought, okay, well, I mean, the first shift, somebody dropped the ball in the communication side of things. That'll be fine. So second shift, exactly the same thing happened. No idea it was coming, nothing for me to do. When I showed up for the third shift, I saw this look of annoyance cross her face. Again, she didn't know I was coming. She had nothing for me to do. I spun on my heel and I walked out and never went back.
Wow.
Right? It's you need to be prepared before you go out and recruit. Make sure everything's ready for them when the volunteers start coming in. Right? It's surprising how seldom that happens. It's surprising how often it happens that a volunteer, someone will apply and nobody gets back to them for 2 weeks or longer, right? Or if you have trouble with getting volunteers, you jump on an application the day it comes in, right? Things like that. There are some very simple things that need to be thought of before you go out and start saying, hey, apply to volunteer here. Are you ready for them?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I have to admit, we've encountered the situation where it's taken weeks to get back to somebody. Not, of course, not intentionally. It's just the workload is so massive sometimes that you just don't get things immediately, or you don't have the time to focus. And it's a lot of disasters that happen rather recurrently with nonprofits. Little mini crises and dealing with shifting issues, shifting policies. A lot of things happen in the instant that you don't have a lot of control over.
Right.
So that's why I was thinking that a larger organization might have more, preparedness in place. Although I would think a gallery would certainly have some level of preparedness in place.
You would think, and I think the larger organizations, the Red Cross and the SPCA and all those really big organizations, they have procedures in place and they have the staff to do it. That's not where their challenges come in. They can push someone through the pipeline really, really smoothly. It's in different areas that those organizations break down. And again, it's because they are so big that they can't build the relationship with the individual volunteers that the volunteers are looking for to make them feel like they're making a difference.
You mentioned the Red Cross. It's interesting. When I was a teenager, I used to I volunteered with the Red Cross, and I started actually because I wanted to learn CPR.
Okay.
And so I went to the Red Cross, and of course you can either pay for the class or you can take the class and then you can do volunteer work sort of to and I thought that the program was excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually continued training, went to school. My producers just shocked that this happened as a teenager, but I actually volunteered to drive an ambulance. I was a volunteer EMT for the station. And all of that started with starting out with the Red Cross.
Right. Oh yeah. I'm not putting down any of these organizations. They do amazing stuff. Right. Yeah, it's and again, with organizations like the Red Cross and the SPCA, these large international organizations, one chapter in one city may be absolutely brilliant and follow all the rules and everything works really well. And you take it to another area, they have the same policies, the same procedures and everything, but the people aren't as careful with them, right? And so things fall through the crack. There can be cultural differences in the same organization between different branches, and that can make a big difference in terms of volunteering.
Yeah, a long time ago, I volunteered for the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Oh, okay.
And it was positive. I won't say that there was, the problems that like you encountered at the gallery, but there were issues. Like for instance, they wanted their volunteers to go in and solicit donations from You know, if a kid's wish was, I want a computer, you know, they would want the volunteers to go out there and try. And of course, I'm not very good at asking for things.
Okay.
Right. So I had some issues, you know, kind of working with through that. And there wasn't a lot of support to help me in that process. It was kind of just like you were thrown out there like, okay, well, this is the wish of the kid. Now you go out and you
get that.
and you
Yeah.
kind of get that. And it's like part of it too is I felt like I'm a volunteer with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. It seems like that request should come from someone more official.
Not necessarily, but they should train you. That's another issue I see when people say, "Oh, we have a recruitment issue." No, you have a training issue. People are quitting because they feel lost and over their heads and things.
Yeah.
If you had been trained and explained, this is why you are being asked to do this. This is how you go about doing it. Here's some tips to make it more successful, and here's your area to go in and discuss it. If you make follow this person, they've been doing it for a while, you watch how they do it, and then you learn to, like mentoring or job shadowing, right? If you do that, you wouldn't have felt so uncomfortable, and you probably would have been more successful, and you would have stuck around longer.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I burned out at that. I mean, again, just dealing with kids that were terminally ill. I mean, it was a very hard thing. Which I guess brings me to my next point. With certain organizations, that has to be just de facto, right? I mean, people are going to burn out. Are there things that nonprofits can do to sort of prevent that burnout? Or, as you say, is it a situation now where people are kind of like, well, I'm going to volunteer here for a little bit and then I'm going to move on and try new things?
It's both. I worked with, I volunteered in an organization. It was a shelter for abused women and children. And there was a volunteer who worked at the front desk. And she worked there for years. She was absolutely amazing. The clients loved her. She was always so cheerful, and she would sit and she would hold somebody's hand and listen to their story for as long as they needed it. And she just soothed everybody. It was so amazing. And she did it for I don't know how long. And we didn't notice when she was starting to come to the end. It got to the point where she didn't want to sit for an hour and listen to stories. She would cut them off and she would go back to the desk and do other things, or she would be a little more abrupt, or she would come in late, whereas before she was always coming in early. And we didn't really recognize, we would see that she was changing, but it didn't occur to us that she was burning out. And then one lady came in, sorry, I get caught up with this one. A lady came in with a little boy who had been beaten really terribly badly. And sorry. And she looked up from the front desk and her face went white, and she ran into the storeroom and locked herself in, didn't come out for 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
That she had just, it's compassion fatigue. You just get to the point where you just can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
She quit as a volunteer, and we supported her as best we could, but she never did volunteer for our organization again. She went, we actually paid for her to have counseling, because she had been so good, and she broke down because of us, because we didn't catch it. And she eventually went out and volunteered again, but never in the sorts of organizations that she would have to deal with things. So what you need to do, if you're in an organization where you can expect burnout or compassion fatigue, is really keep an eye on your volunteers. If you see change happening, pull them aside and ask them. If you know they're going to be dealing with things a lot, make sure that they take vacations, right? Get them out of there. Like if they've been filling a shift for 2 months, make sure they do a shift where they don't have to deal with the phones on a hotline or the front desk of a shelter. Have them volunteer doing something completely different so that they have that mental and emotional break. But most of it, just watch and be willing to let somebody step away if they need to. It's better to say, yeah, you go off for 6 months, and when you're better, come back. We're happy for that, rather than push them for as long as we can keep you, and then they're gone unhappy and never going to say anything nice about your organization. Right? So
yeah, that's a good point. And I'm sorry to hear about that experience. I can see how that affects you.
oh, yeah, and it's not. There are so many organizations that deal with this on a regular basis, and the more we can support them, the better.
Yeah. So, what are other signs of burnout that I mean, just changes in behavior, changes in routines?
Attitude. You can get people who were friendly, and now all of a sudden they're starting to snap at the other volunteers or at the staff. Yeah, looking for excuses. Oh, I can't make it this time. I can't make my shift. Those are the sorts of things. And then just tired. You can see them trying to do things, and they can't focus. They can't. Yeah, it's just like burnout in an employee or something. You can tell that they're tired, but you have to be watching for it.
And I imagine a lot of times too, the volunteers themselves don't even realize what's happening.
In a lot of cases, especially senior volunteers who have been there forever, they often feel that the organization would fall apart if they weren't there, and so they will push themselves even when they know that they're struggling, because they feel like they can't. Too much is riding on them. So that's another thing that you can work on, is say, hey, why don't you help train this person? Can you mentor this person so that they're as good at this as you are? And something like that can take somebody who feels like they're the only ones who can do it, and then they can teach it. So it gives them that change is as good as a rest type thing, and gives them a different kind of focus, and it trains up somebody else so that they can go on a vacation or they can take a break without feeling that everything's going to fall apart, because they train them. So obviously they're good. Right.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Because again, as someone who's burned out, like with Make-A-Wish, I would have loved to have, and you're right, I never did go back to volunteering there or for any organization that was similar because of that.
Right.
And again, I don't even have a bad experience with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, right? I mean,
it doesn't have to be a bad experience. It just needs to be you feeling like you're not making a difference. You feeling like you're a fish out of water. This isn't what I thought I was going to be doing, and I'm not any good at it. So I don't want to be part of this, right?
Yeah.
So if you train somebody so that they are good at it, you've added to their skill and you've added to their self-esteem, and then you're more likely to stay, right?
Yeah, great points. I want to ask you a little bit about governmental support for volunteerism. We kind of touched upon that a little bit earlier. How much financial?
Not enough of it.
No.
Sorry.
Well, let me ask you a question before I get to the question I was going to ask you. Do you support a governmental program where, like at 18, you're sort of required to do some sort of a community service?
Mm, I've never, I don't know. That's a hard one. My instant gut reaction saying, if you're forced to do it, it's not volunteering.
Right. Right.
um, but on the other hand, it it removes barriers. That kind of program sets things up so somebody who might never have considered volunteering gets the experience and therefore realizes, this is actually a lot of fun, so long as there's enough flexibility in that they can do what they want. If they're
Right.
told you must volunteer and you must volunteer in a hospital, then it's not so good. But there's good and bad to both. It would have to be very carefully put together, but I'm not 100% against it. I think it
Yeah.
has benefits to it.
Yeah. No, I kind of feel the same way. I'm kind of conflicted because on the one hand, it feels like conscription, right?
Yeah,
And you know, I mean, like, some countries, Israel, for instance, I mean, when you turn 18, you have to go into the military.
right.
I mean,
Oh,
I'm
it's like that in the US for a while too, wasn't it?
yeah, it
Up
certainly
until
was.
fairly
Yeah.
recently. Yeah,
So I'm definitely against anything like that.
right.
But on the other hand, I think that young people would benefit from volunteering more.
Everybody benefits from
Yeah.
volunteering. Maybe that's what we should do, is instead of saying it's once you're a certain age you have to do it. What if we say everybody has to volunteer at least 2 hours a month, or a year even, right? If everybody has to do it, then maybe it'll be easier. I don't know how you would track that or anything like
Right.
that. What you would do, how would you enforce something like that? How would you enforce it if it was just 18-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to say, oh, well, you can't, I don't know, we'll charge you more with taxes? I mean, how are they going to put that through?
Well, I encourage people too to volunteer with friends and family.
Yeah,
I mean, make it a family thing. I mean, you're teaching your kids responsibility. You're teaching them. You're exposing them to, other world, other cultures, other,
viewpoints.
societal issues. Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, of course, it may be harder to find something that you can do with children.
Mhm. I started volunteering when I was 11 years old. Now, my family was not, uh, never considered themselves volunteers. Somebody needed help, they'd help, but that wasn't volunteering.
Right.
Volunteering was something else, right? I went to visit my grandmother in her care home, and I was 11 years old, and everybody was upset because the person who called bingo didn't show up that day. Now, the people who wanted to play bingo didn't want to call bingo because, then they couldn't play. And the people who didn't play bingo wanted nothing to do with it. And so I was saying, well, all you have to do is just read off these numbers, right? Pull this ball out of this net and read off these numbers. He said, yeah, yeah. So I called bingo all one afternoon. And the people were so thankful, and they gave me hugs and kisses and cookies and all sorts of treats. And I thought, something, this volunteering, this is a good deal. And that started me on a lifetime of volunteering, right? And sometimes volunteering in a formal way for an organization, sometimes in an informal way where somebody just needs help. Oh, our neighbor needs groceries, I'll go get it, right? It's all volunteering. And having that experience, having that one amazing experience when I was so young, has set me on a lifetime of it. And yeah, so it's not that hard to find something that children can do. You just have to be, the organizations have to be, instead of thinking of what you have a volunteer do as a role with all of these tasks involved, say what task needs to be done, what task can be done by a 6-year-old or a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old or whoever,
Right.
right? And break things up, micro volunteering, little bits. And that way you have opportunities for everybody. It's not that difficult, no matter what organization you're in. Even if you're a food bank or a soup kitchen, 6-year-olds can help wash dishes, can help serve. God, they would love it if they would serve, right? You just have to be willing to show them how to do it.
And again, that's another hoop that organizations have to get over. I think as well is the organizational mindset. I think really has to change drastically from what it is now. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's starting. Since COVID, a lot of organizations are realizing that what used to work doesn't work anymore, especially around volunteering. People have woken up. For many years, decades, we just didn't think about it. If our family volunteered, then we volunteered, and that's just what we do. Nobody really put a lot of thought into it. COVID shook everybody up, and now everybody's thinking, okay, why am I doing this again? Why am I doing it in this way? Is this the best way for me and for society? Or can I do this in a different way and have a greater impact? So people are starting to rethink things that they never did before. And I think if organizations can be flexible enough to get hold of that, we can see an amazing change.
That's a huge challenge, though.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is. And it won't happen just because of one organization, or because even that's when we start thinking about getting governments involved. We've got to start changing how we all think about volunteering, and how we all think about not-for-profits as a whole, like as an entity, not just the volunteer portion of it, but how are we making a difference in the world, and is this the best way?
Yeah.
What was it, about 2 years ago, maybe 3, I think it was the Chicago Art Gallery fired all their docents, every single one of them, like just flattened it and rebuilt it, because there was an if I'm remembering this correctly, I read about this a few years ago. They had been bringing on, like, the docents were kind of in charge of themselves. They were the ones who recruited other people, and it got to the point where it was all wealthy white women, or almost all wealthy white women, and they would have that worldview. And so they realized that if the gallery realized that if they wanted to bring in diversity and really show the community that equity was important to them, they had to break that stranglehold that the docent program had on it. And the only way they could do it was to start from scratch. And it blew up. It was in all the papers and things like that. If you Google it, you can read all about it. But they had to do that. And it was when that happened, this is one example of one organization that has made a difference significantly, is they took a huge risk, and it paid off. Their program is much more inclusive now than it was. The belonging is so much better than it was, and other organizations are starting to follow suit. So they took the risk and the challenge and paved the way. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen that often. Not-for-profits, as I'm sure you understand, are really risk averse.
Yeah.
They need to be. But if you can get a few to do that, it can make a big difference. That's why governments or larger organizations, like umbrella organizations, like here it's Volunteer Canada, Imagine Canada, Alive in the US, these are organizations that support volunteerism. If they start making those decisions and helping the organizations that they support to make those decisions and make that transition, that's what's going to make the real difference. But that kind of thing requires support from government to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not a lot of that going on, which brings me to another question on that topic. How much financial burden do volunteers actually take off the government's shoulders?
Oh, God. Billions, maybe trillions. I've seen all sorts of numbers bandied about. I don't know 100%, but I would say it's probably in the high billions, low trillions. That, I mean, if you think about it, if even take one hospital, staffing, taking the volunteers out, and how much staff would they have to bring to replace those volunteers for one hospital, right? And when you put that across every little radio station or animal shelter or any of this sort of thing, all the opioid crisis
Right.
organizations, all the equity inclusion organizations, I mean, there are, yeah, it would easily be trillions.
Wow.
So, yeah, and we still think of them as free labor. It just blows my mind.
Well, and that brings us to the next point, is that, as you mentioned, governments need to do more,
right?
Especially given how dependent governments are on volunteerism, and as well as all of society, for that matter. Politically, I don't know how it is in Canada, but I know here in America, politically, that idea is almost dead in the water. The idea of getting government to actually involve itself in such a wide-reaching program. Right. What do you think the solution to that is?
Do we need where the money is? It's all finances. If we can show, well, let's face it, politicians care about two things. They care about money and they care about getting reelected. If we can tie volunteerism to those two things, then they'll pay attention. If you can show a politician that so many of their constituents are volunteers and care about being volunteers and want volunteers and their organizations to be supported, then they're more likely to listen. But you have to have the volunteers knocking on the politician's door and saying, this is important to me, deal with it. Unfortunately, especially in today's world where, let's face it, I can't afford to have a house. I have nowhere to live because the cost of housing is through the roof. The cost of food is through the roof. All of a sudden, things like volunteering are low on people's priority, and rightly so. I mean, you need to eat, right? You need to have a place to sleep before you start asking for other things. But I think what we need to do right now is make the plans so that when the economy is stronger and people are in better positions, then we're ready to pull the trigger and actually go out and say, okay, now we've got these serious issues under control. Let's deal with this, because it's going to save you money. It's going to get you reelected.
Yeah.
It takes planning.
It does.
It takes lots of planning.
You know, and again, it's so frustrating here in the United States, just politically, because we've got two parties that just don't seem to get it.
Yeah.
And you know, there's, yeah, I mean, it's quite depressing because, as you said earlier too, given the economic situation, a lot of people, instead of volunteering, they're working 2-3 jobs.
Right.
And that puts a huge strain on nonprofits that are. It's really a vicious cycle, if you think about it. I mean, you've got these societal problems that prevent change, and you've got organizations that are trying to break through that barrier, but at the same time, they're dealing with those same social issues, the economy that's an impediment. So it is a vicious cycle.
I've just thought of something. What if, how would we do this? It'd be the same as donations. So I'm assuming that in the States, if you donate a certain amount of money, you get a tax write-off, right? But we never give tax write-offs for hours volunteered. What if we did? Rather than saying when you turn 18, you have to volunteer, what if you say for every 10 hours, you get X amount of tax write-off?
That's a great idea.
How would that work? What would be the downside to that? It would have to be something around proving it, like making it being able to prove that you put the hours in, but you could get that a letter or some form by the organization.
Well, I mean, organizations, I mean, when we receive donations, we issue a receipt that they can use. And that receipt is, because we're a 501c3,
right.
That receipt is proof so we could do something very similar, just give receipts.
Yeah. There must be a downside, or somebody would have suggested this before. I don't know. I can't think of one.
I can't think of one either. That would certainly encourage more people to volunteer, I think.
Absolutely. And it would help with the economic crisis. It would help people, right?
Absolutely.
And it would make the politician who put it in look really good.
That's a great idea. It really is. I don't know what the downsides could possibly be either.
If any of your listeners get in touch with me. I want to dig into this more. If you have any reason that this wouldn't work, tell me so that we can come up with ways to work around that barrier.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. My mind is racing trying to think of why hasn't this been presented. I mean, Republicans.
It may just be because we've always thought of volunteers as free labor. It may come down to something that simple.
What kind of appreciation or recognition? I mean, this is really a perfect segue, because I am curious, what kind of recognition do you think volunteers should receive from governments? And I think that's one of them. Mm-hmm. Where else can we expand that to?
Just support for training. It's less directly to the volunteer and more support for the organizations to support the volunteers. So make it easier to get grants for training volunteers. Make it easier to get grants for appreciation of volunteers. Things like that, I think, would be beneficial. And yeah, just supporting the volunteer, the groups that place volunteers, like Volunteer Canada. If you want to volunteer and you don't know where, you can apply to them, and they have a whole list. So they kind of support volunteers and organizations. So if the government could support those types of organizations, because right now I don't know what it's like in the States, but in Canada, a lot of these smaller umbrella organizations are folding because they can't keep open anymore. They're running out of money. And yet the service that they provide is key to keeping volunteers in organizations.
Have any countries that you're familiar with implemented policies that successfully bolster volunteerism?
Australia does a decent job of it. They've got policies in place that that are better than most. I can't say they're fantastic, but they're good. The one thing with Australia and with Britain is they have a lot of volunteer data. They do a lot of surveys and find out what volunteering is like in their countries. Canada hasn't been doing that, and I don't believe the US has been doing much of that. That's one thing that I was telling you in Canada, we're trying to get a seat at the table type thing in Parliament. One of the things we want to do is get more studies done on volunteerism in Canada. Who is volunteering? How often do they volunteer? What organizations do they volunteer for? All that information, and keep that information current. And that can help us guide the changes that need to come in. If we can see that most of the volunteers who, so for example, if all the Gen Z or Gen X or younger volunteers only volunteer for a short period of time at each organization, well, that's information that those organizations can use, right? Because then they can tailor their programs to take advantage of that. So the more information we can get, the better. And Australia and Britain are really good at doing surveys on how that works, whereas Canada and the US are a little bit behind on that.
Yeah, I would imagine too. I think I read somewhere that the Nordic countries like Sweden, Norway, have high rates of volunteerism.
I know very little about those countries, I'm afraid. Yeah, the ones that I deal with most are fairly obviously the English-speaking countries. Right. I have heard that they're really strong. I've heard that there are countries that are really making it a focus right now. I know Georgia in Eastern Europe is making a big push to increase volunteerism, because it never really been part of their culture before, and they're starting that. I know Canada has a very high volunteerism rate. We're not top of the world. I'm trying to remember. I saw a study once on who is, and we're in the top 10, but I can't remember exactly who was at the top. Now I'm guessing, so I won't do that. But there have been studies, international studies done on that. So,
can you share any examples of how volunteering has helped people in their careers?
Oh, sure. Let's see. Is it Sarah? I think it was Sarah. I'm the president of the board of directors for the Therapeutic Riding Association here in my city.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I grew up on a cattle farm, so I've been riding horses all my life. And so that when I wanted to volunteer, this was one thing that really jumped out at me. And she wanted to become a vet, but she grew up in the city. She didn't have a lot of experience. She just loved animals, blah, blah, blah. So she volunteered with us, leading kids on horses, like kids with disabilities, and working with the horses and the rest of it. And she actually changed her career, and she got into I can't remember the proper name for it, but she's becoming someone who works with kids with autism.
Oh,
so
wow.
Completely changed her focus, and she's she's loving it. She got into volunteering with us because she loved horses, and now it's the kids that got her going. So yeah, no, that's my favorite of those stories. But yeah, I can name lots and lots of people do it just to pad resumes, to get experience. A lot of people come from other countries, and they need to get experience. They need to learn a bit about what working in Canada is all about, or working in the States compared to whatever country they came from. And Yeah, no, it's they get the experience, they get the networking, they start meeting people, and they gain more confidence, and all of that helps with job search.
Yeah. It's we kind of talked earlier about how volunteerism a lot of the time is about doing something for ourselves.
Right.
So I mean, rather that, but again, instead of looking at that as being something that's selfish, I mean, look at all the, for instance, look at all the kids that
She's helping now.
she's helping now as a result of volunteering and improving her career to that stage.
Yes. Yeah, that's why I'm saying there is nothing wrong with doing something for yourself, because it will affect everybody else.
How can we encourage more people to volunteer where time does feel like it's a limited resource?
Start with things that you love to do. If you're passionate about it, number one, you will find time. Um, a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't have time. I don't have time," and then they'll binge watch Netflix. Right? Let's be honest, that happens. So if you really love what you're doing, you're more likely to drop things like that sort of thing to do it. Another is find an organization who's willing to be flexible and let you work when and how you need to. Whether it's if you have the skills to help them with a website, get their website up and working, or make changes to their website, or post on social media. If you love bumming around on social media anyway, hey, help an organization post on social media every day, right? I mean, it's part of what you want to do anyway, and it only takes what, half an hour a day, right? Or half an hour a week even, depending on the organization. So find things that you love to do, and find an organization that lets you be flexible in helping. Those are the two key.
Where can people go to, say some listener is interested in volunteering but has no idea where to get started? Are there resources available? You mentioned one in Canada that helps connect people to organizations in
Volunteer
need of
Canada.
volunteers.
I think you do have them in the States. If you search Alive, um, what does Alive stand for again? Association of Leaders of Volunteers in, oh, I can't remember. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but if they don't do the actual matching, they would be able to connect you with organizations that do. But if you know what you want to do, like if you know what skills you have or what skills you want to learn, and you know what you're passionate about, whether it's the environment or the arts or animals or children or whatever, Google it. Google charities for kids in San Francisco, right? Or whatever, right? Just Google, see what comes up, and then check out their websites. Does something really jump out at you, right? And then reach out to them. Say, hey, I've never volunteered before. What's involved? It's not hard. Like I said, there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of organizations desperately looking for people to help. And you can make such a difference in the world, not only to other people or to the environment, but to yourself as well.
What about people who say, well, gee, I don't have any marketable skills for nonprofits? How can we convince them that they're wrong?
You don't need to convince them you're wrong. Even if you don't have marketable skills, everybody can stuff envelopes if it comes down to that. Or go there and something that you may not think of as a marketable skill. Maybe, are you friendly? Do you like talking to people? Go and be a friendly visitor at a senior's home, right? If you like riding bikes, maybe you can deliver meals on your bike, right? You don't have to have an official skill. By living, you have skills. So you're just sharing those skills.
Right. It's so, I mean, I would also argue that passion itself
Mm-hmm.
for a cause is a skill.
It's a skill. Yeah, absolutely. If you love something, you'll get better at it. You'll learn the skills that you need to make it even more of a difference. But just coming in there with your enthusiasm and say, hey, I want to make a difference. How can I help? They'll get you in there. They'll train you. They'll make sure that you can make a difference.
Are there we talked a lot about polarization, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about volunteerism as a tool for reducing polarization.
Okay.
Have you seen examples where volunteerism has helped work toward a common cause to reduce adversity and animosity in communities?
Not directly. I've seen it open people's eyes. I've seen people working at a homeless shelter, for example, who go in there with kind of a saviorism attitude. I'm going to go and help these poor people, right? And after a couple shifts, they're starting to see that, hey, these are real people. I'm not going and helping some poor broken down so and so, right? This is Peter, and my God, Peter can write poetry like you wouldn't believe, right? And you see that change. It's a glorious thing to watch when you see them, and the first shift or two, they come out with kind of a confused look on their face as they can realize this isn't what they thought it was. And then all of a sudden, you see that door open up, and they realize there's a whole other world that they didn't even know existed. And then that, again, like I said before, is once they realize that there's one door that opens to a different world, then they start looking for other doors to open, right? And you can see the most amazing things. And on top of that too, when you work for, or if you volunteer in an organization, even your co-volunteers can help you expand your thinking. In Toastmasters, there was, I've got a picture somewhere, I can't remember where it was, of a friend of mine who is from Saudi Arabia, in a big hug with a guy who was Jewish, right? And it was just like Orthodox Jew. So it was amazing to watch, and they would never have spoken. They would never have had the opportunity to speak if it wasn't for volunteering in the same organization, right? And now they're really good friends, and they disagree on many things, but that doesn't mean they don't like each other as people, right? And that's the difference. You can disagree with someone without being their enemy.
Yes.
And I think that's the key that volunteerism does, is it shows you that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know how it is in Canada, but here in America, it really is a contentious environment where you see, someone that you disagree with as the enemy.
Yeah.
And I think our media and our politics has cultivated that, unfortunately. I don't know to what end, because it's just created a lot of divisiveness.
Yeah, I've never quite figured out. We're not as bad here. We have our nice culture. We all have to be nice to each other. But yeah, it is one thing I see, and I can see why it's happening. And it started down in the States, and it's migrated up here, unfortunately, is if we're having an election this year as well. So all this election campaigning has become less an issue about what I can do for you as what the other guys will do to you.
Yes.
Right? It's all this tearing down the other person to get you higher up. Scare the other person, or scare the voters into not wanting them, and then I'll get elected. And it works. Unfortunately, it does work. but they don't realize that because they've done that, people are afraid of all of them. We don't trust any politicians anymore because we've heard all the rhetoric from both sides. And so, yeah, politicians are not trustworthy. It doesn't matter which side of the party they're on or which side of the house they're on. So, yeah, I don't get why they do it, but well, I understand why they do it. They do it because it works and it gets them elected, but it hurts everybody in the long run.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's causing major rifts. I mean, people have started saying, in America we're on the verge of another civil war, which is unimaginable, right? Yeah. But being here and feeling that tension and seeing the divisiveness on social media, you start to wonder, well, maybe we are heading in that direction, because the fear, the hate, and I think it's fear more than anything. I think the fear is driving the hate.
Yeah, I agree very much that way. And they're feeding that fear.
Yeah.
And the politicians themselves are feeding that fear. And that's what really hurts, is you can look at it and say, that don't you get it? You're saying, why don't people vote anymore? Why do so few people vote? Well, because you're all losers. That's why, right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I'm so sorry to hear that it's migrating up to Canada.
Yeah. A lot of what you guys do comes up here in one form or another. So
unfortunately, I apologize.
We need another wall to keep you guys down there.
Yes, I agree. Build a wall to prevent us from coming in, because we don't bring good ideas these days.
Oh, well, that's not nice. I have a lot of really good American friends, and like anything else, the politics aren't the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely. Well, we're running out of time here, so I want to bring your website up again. And let me find it here. KarenKnight.ca. Where else can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Karen Knight Consulting. I'm on Facebook. Not very much on Facebook, but you can easily find me on LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn.
Perfect. And I'm assuming all of your contact information is on your website.
Absolutely, yeah. And Google me. You can find me. I'm easy to find.
So KarenKnight.ca. Karen, I want to thank you. I had so much fun and I learned so much. I want to thank you for joining us. Do you have any final words, anything that you'd like to add that we didn't cover?
If you haven't volunteered yet, do. You would not believe the difference it can make in your life. If you're a leader of volunteers, build flexibility into your program. Try and find ways to make it easier for people to volunteer. Most of you know that already. Just if you haven't volunteered, do it. There is so little, there's so few other things that will give you the satisfaction that volunteering does.
I agree.
It's brilliant.
I agree. Get out there and volunteer. Find something that you love doing. Find a cause that you're deeply passionate about, and get involved. And I think, maybe a lot of people too are afraid of, as you said, that time commitment. Well, I've only got a few hours here and there. Is there anything for me to volunteer? What would you say to that? I mean, of course there is, right?
Yeah. You may have to dig a little deeper to find the right spot, but those opportunities are out there. And if you can't find an organization that can fit that, there's nothing stopping you from helping your neighbors. That's volunteering too, right?
Yeah.
Somebody a senior needs their driveway shoveled in the winter time, or mow somebody's lawn, or get groceries for them, or take them to a doctor's appointment, or whatever. Help somebody who's broken down on the side of the road, for goodness sakes. Right.
We actually have a program in the United States that some schools are doing where they allow kids to get out of taking physical education. And instead, they go out and volunteer to mow lawns for the elderly.
That's a brilliant idea. I love that idea.
Yeah, and they're not being forced to. It's just a complete volunteer thing. Like, if you don't want to take physical education,
Right.
which would have been me as a kid.
Me too.
You can go and you can mow a lawn or something of that nature
Right.
in the neighborhood, and it's beneficial on many levels. The kids find it enjoyable, and they're getting something out of it, and of course the community is getting something out of it.
Right. And they're building relationships with
Yeah.
people they wouldn't have met before.
Otherwise, yep.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fantastic. So, yeah.
Well, geez. Thank you so much again for coming on the show. I really had a lot of fun.
Let me know if approaching the teaching schools helps.
I will definitely do that. I will.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I believe we're off next week, so we will see you the week after. This has been Coup Save America. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.